Hello there, this is L24 World News and these are your headlines. China's President Xi Jinping on Thursday warned his US counterpart Joe Biden not to play with fire over Taiwan during a candid telephone conversation. Russian forces launched a missile attack on the Kiev area for the first time in weeks Thursday, in what Ukraine said was a revenge for standing up to the Kremlin. Algeria, Niger and Nigeria signed a memorandum of understanding on Thursday to build a 4,000-kilometer trans-Saharan gas pipeline. In the UK, inflation hit a 4-decade high, placing greater pressure on the Bank of England to respond with a large rate hike of its own next month. Good afternoon, I'm your host Abdulrahim Kashur, and those who are today's top stories. First, in our topical stories, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping have talked for 2 hours in what's being described as a tense phone call. It is the 5th time they have spoken on the phone since Joe Biden took office. President Xi Jinping has warned Joe Biden not to, as he put it, play with fire over Taiwan. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, says she may visit the island. Beijing says it's part of China's territory. The U.S. President is reported to have raised allegations of genocide and forced labor practices linked to Beijing's treatment of Uyghur Muslims. He also said to have criticized China's aggressive military attitude across Asia. Biden is not reported to have talked about removing U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. He also accused Beijing of unfair trade practices within, he said, harm American workers. Latest figures in the U.S. indicate that gross domestic product, GDP, has shrunk for the second quarter in a row. GDP is a measure of value of all goods and services produced by a country, which is often used to judge how an economy is doing. A U.S. recession will declare if the GDP shrinks in the next quarter, but the job growth is still strong, which hasn't been the case in previous downturns. Sofian Kantori.
American consumers are suffering as a result of the inflation rate, which is currently at 4-decade high of 9%. The base interest at which money is lent raised 4 times this year already. Another blow to national confidence has come with announcements that GDP shrank for the second quarter. Despite this, President Joe Biden is certain that the economy will improve.
Yesterday's Fed chairman, the Fed chairman Powell made it clear that he doesn't think the U.S. economy is currently in a recession.
The Biden administration and Treasury Secretary both believe that the fact that employment is growing at an unprecedented rate with over 2.5 million jobs generated this year alone is conclusive evidence that they are doing a good job.
Most economists and most Americans have a similar definition of recession: substantial job losses and mass layoffs, businesses shutting down, private sector activities slowing considerably, family budgets under immense strain, in sum, a broad-based weakening of our economy. That is not what we're seeing right now.
Polls indicated that some 50% of the US population believes that the recession has already begun, despite what President Joe Biden says.
There's going to be a lot of chatter today on Wall Street and among pundits about whether we are in a recession. But if you look at our job market, consumer spending, business investment, we see signs of economic progress in the second quarter as well.
A number of chief executive officers also agreed that there is no recession at meeting with President Biden, citing the notable absence of most historically dependable indicator of downturn, a half-point decrease in the employment rate on average over several months.
To the Russian military operation in Ukraine, Russian forces launched a missile attack on the Kiev area for the first time in weeks Thursday and pounded the northern Chernihiv region as well, in what Ukraine said it was revenge for standing up to the Kremlin. According to a senior Ukrainian official, Alexei Hermov, Russian attacked the Kiev region with 6 missiles launched from the Black Sea, hitting a military unit in the village of Luizhiv on the outskirts of the capital. Ukraine stated its campaign to retake the southern city of Kherson is underway, while Russia said its offensive on the Donbass front has intensified and it has taken control of strategically significant power plant in Donetsk. According to Igor Kushenkov, spokesman for the Russian Defense Ministry on Thursday, the battalion of 60th Infantry Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine entirely lost its combat capacity in Kherson as a result of Russian attacks utilizing high-precision weaponry on Ukrainian troops. Britain's Ministry of Defense said in an intelligence update on Friday that Russia has given the controversial private military firm Wagner Group responsibility for parts of the front line in eastern Ukraine as it faces a shortage of combat infantry. Ukraine's grain exports through the Black Sea are expected to resume in the next 24 hours. 25 million tons of grain stock in Ukrainian ports since Russia invaded. That's caused food shortages around the world. UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths says these are encouraging signs.
There was a lot of very constructive, helpful negotiations between those two parties. But I don't think I've had experience of an agreement like this one, in which two warring parties, still very much at war, of course, understandably, have come together for an agreement which is not about ending the war, like a ceasefire often is, and therefore puts the parties in a different place. This isn't about ending the war. This is an agreement which continues despite the war, and in which the two parties sitting in that center in Istanbul, enemies still, need to work together to bring to fruition the things that they have agreed to.
The UN Shipping Agency says removing sea mines from Ukraine's port is going to take several months. Ukraine mined the ports to stop sea attack from Russia. Seashores in Odessa are closed and signs warn of the danger. Kiev says Russia's also laid 372 sea mines. Moscow accuses Ukraine of laying 400 mines in the approach to several ports, including Odessa. Russia says some of those have drifted into the Black Sea. International insurance companies have put the region on the high-risk list, and that means the cost of shipping grain is likely to go up. Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says the successful transport of Ukrainian grain that has been trapped in the Black Sea ports would bring a serious boost of confidence for Moscow as well as for Kiev.
Anlaşma imzalandı.
The agreement was signed and the coordination center was established. Now the work continues in technical terms. Our wish is for these exports to materialize without interruption and without any problems, and especially as priority for grain and wheat to reach the countries that need urgently, and fertilizer is very important for the agricultural industry.
To a different matter now, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arrived at Elysee, where he was received by the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, for a dinner considered necessary by presidency in view of the soaring energy prices, the food crisis in the Middle East, and concerns about Iran's nuclear program. A memorandum of understanding was signed in Algiers by the Algerian Minister of Energy and Mines, Mohamed Arkab, Nigerian Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, and Nigerian Minister of Energy and Renewable Energy to build a 4,000-kilometer trans-Saharan gas pipeline. Marabel will tackle the story in this report.
Algeria, Niger, and Nigeria signed a memorandum of understanding on Thursday to to build a 4,000 kilometers trans-Saharan gas pipeline. Algeria's Energy Ministry Mohamed Arqab stated that the document signed aims to go ahead with the trans-Saharan gas pipeline project.
The meeting we had today in Algiers is really important for a strategic project, which is the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline through Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria.
The pipeline will transport up to 30 billion cubic meters of gas annually from Nigeria once the 13 billion project is complete. It is also expected to be pumped undersea. Nigerian Minister of State for Petroleum Resources confirmed that the meeting is an attestation of the commitment of Algeria, Niger, and Nigeria to make this project a reality.
We believe that the time for this project has come for the energy security of Africa and also for the additional monetization of our gas resources.
Niger's Minister of Energy and Renewable Energy stressed on the importance of the project for African security and energy resources, assuring that this trilateral cooperation testifies for the capacity of African countries to cooperate in carrying out projects for the continent.
We are very optimistic about the progress of the project. The task force was set up and it will ensure that we move quickly towards the review of the feasibility study.
The TSGP will source natural gas from Nigeria and cross north through Niger and further to Algeria. It will connect the existing pipelines that reach Europe.
Still in the African continent, U.S. Special Envoy and Ambassador to Libya renewed his call Wednesday for the need to resume oil production in Libya.
It's clear to us that the current oil shutdown needs to end immediately, and that the process of managing Libyan oil revenues and getting those revenues to the benefit of the Libyan people is more important than ever.
On Thursday, the UN Security Council voted to prolong its political mission in Libya, but on demand of Russia for only 3 months instead of a whole year. The 3 African representatives on the council choose not to vote in a protest of Russia's obstruction of the longer extension they claim is required to assist the divided nation in moving toward elections and stability. Human Rights Watch has issued a report in which it denounced the Moroccan system's strategy towards protesters' opposing position. A 134-page report was another proof for the Makhzen regime to show the underhanded tactics that repress the opposition in the country, to export an image and a rights-respecting country, while it leads the oppression in the country against the people and everybody who does not share ideas with the system. Usama Ayati.
In a 134-page report under the title "They'll Get You No Matter What," Morocco's playbook to crush dissent, Human Rights Watch points fingers at the Moroccan regime, documenting a range of tactics that, when used together, form an ecosystem of repression, aiming not only to muzzle dissenting voices, but to scare off all potential critiques.
المعطي منجيب المؤرخ الكذاب منجيب الغدار اللي خل المغرب تبا لي الخونه المعطي منجيب عميل الخارج المعطي منجيب مأجور كذاب وجاحد والبقيه تاتي خيال المعطي منجيب الإجرامي. هذه غير عينة قليلة من عناوين اللي كتبتها عليا مواقع إعلامية مقربة من السلطة.
The report illustrates a number of tactics that widen the doors to report what the Makhzen regime is practicing against its opponents inside the country and even abroad. Unfair trials, long prison terms for non-speech criminal charges, harassment and smear campaigns in state-aligned media, as well as targeting dissidents' relatives, are the dominant criteria of the Moroccan system against those who do not share the ideas with the regime.
عمر في السجن الاحتياطي بدون تبرير لمدة سنة وما تعطاهش الملف ديالو فعمر ما كانش كيعرف شنو هي التهم ديالو فكيفاش يمكن له يدافع على راسو هو ما عارفش شنو هي التهم اللي عنده.
Critiques of the state were also subjected to video and digital surveillance, and in some cases to physical intimidation and assault that the police failed to investigate properly.
كانت مختبرات تقنية خبرتني بأن التليفون ديالي تعرض للهجوم ديال على طريق بيغاسوس اللوجيسيال ديال التجسس اللي كيسمح بالوصول الايميل، التصاور، التسجيلات، المكالمات، لاي شيء يعني انهم كانوا عبروا كيتمكنوا انهم يطلعوا على كل حياتي الشخصيه.
Throughout the past 2 decades, Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations have documented how Moroccan courts have convicted dozens of journalists and activists and closed, heavily fined or otherwise sanctioned media outlets critical of the authorities on charges of libel, publishing false news, insulting or defaming local officials, state bodies or foreign heads of state, and undermining state security or the institution of the monarchy.
كيتلقاو ليا واحد جوج الناس كيهدوني كيقولوا لي بنتك الله يرحمها وقالوا الاسم ديالها، بنتي العمر ديالها 6 سنوات. اتصلت انا بالدار، الحمد لله لقيتها مزيان، كنت في واحد الحاله يرثى لها.
The report showed that Moroccan authorities are using indirect and underhanded tactics to silence critical activists and journalists. The moves aim to preserve Morocco's coveted image as a moderate, rights-respecting country, while it grows ever more repressive.
The Labour Democratic Party in Morocco called for a solution to the conflict in Western Sahara on the basis of self-determination and called on all forces in the kingdom to stand together against the tyranny. Hussein Burkan.
In the final statement of its 5th National Congress, the Democratic Labour Party in Morocco called for the opening of serious dialogue on the basis of self-determination and relevant international resolutions to resolve the conflict in Western Sahara and spare the region more suffering and tragedies. The Moroccan party highlighted that the settling of Sahrawi issue in accordance with international conventions will contribute to opening the way for democratic solutions that will pave the way for building the unity of the Maghreb peoples.
It strongly calls for the fateful unity between the peoples of the Maghreb and the renunciation of the chauvinistic strife and ruptures fueled by existing regime, and calls for resolving the conflict in Western Sahara on the basis of self-determination and opening a serious dialogue on the basis of relevant international decisions to spare the region more suffering and tragedies, and in order to open the way for democratic solutions that will pave the way for building the unity of the Maghreb peoples.
Speaking about internal situation in Morocco, the party stressed the need for different parties to join forces in order to get rid of Al-Makhzen, which includes all classes and social groups affected by the tyranny of Al-Makhzen mafia. The party also denounced the murder of dozens of African migrants on the Moroccan-Spanish border on June 24 and condemned all reactionary policies pursued by Al-Makhzen regime in the immigration file. The statement rejected categorically the normalization of relations with the Zionist entity and expressed its full solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for the liberation of Palestine and the building of its democratic state on the Palestinian soil with Al-Quds as its capital.
Hamas, the ruling movement of Gaza Strip, on Thursday denied Zionist allegations that the movement's armed wing Al-Qassam brigades has military sites in civilian areas in the Palestinian enclave. Hamas spokesman Abu Ubaida said in a press release that the Zionist army's allegations are pure lies and misinformation. Life goes on in Tahrir Square in central Baghdad a day after supporters of Iraqi cleric Muqtada Sadr stormed the Iraqi parliament in the capital's high-security green zone to protest appointment of a rival bloc for the post of Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi had called on protesters to withdraw immediately from the green zone, warning in a statement that the security forces would ensure the protection of state institutions and foreign tasks.
The political class arrived thanks to America. It has now been 9 months since the elections took place and the government has still not been formed, whereas in all countries of the world, after the elections were held, the government is formed within 3 days to a week. But it's been 9 months. They still haven't formed a government, and it risks leading to a political chaos and foreign interference.
Iran welcomes the continuation of diplomacy and dialogue, Amir Abdul Hayyan reportedly told Joseph Borrell, the highest-ranking ambassador of the European Union, according to Iranian official media. The discussion took place the day after Borrell suggested a new wording for the agreement that, in his words, reflects the determination of all to assure sustainability, including the commitment of President Joe Biden and U.S. assurance in this regard. North Korean leader Kim Jong said his country was ready to mobilize its nuclear war deterrence and counter any U.S. military clash, and criticized South Korea's new president for the first time when Seoul was pushing toward the brink of war. Kim made the remark during a speech at an event to mark the 69th anniversary of July 27 Korean War ceasefire, which left the two Koreas technically still at war. At least 3 people have died after torrential rains caused massive flooding in eastern Kentucky, leaving a number of people stranded on rooftops and in trees. According to the governor of this southeastern state, this is one of the largest and deadliest floods which have taken place in Kentucky in a very long time.
I went over next door to the big house because my mom's there and she's got Parkinson's, and we had to worry about getting her upstairs. But the water was coming over that bridge over there, and there's, you can see all the debris broke through the fences.
A group of 98 migrants were rescued from truck bound for United States but abandoned by its driver on the side of a road in eastern Mexico, barely a month after the death of 53 people in San Antonio in Texas under similar conditions. The migrants were found overnight from Wednesday to Thursday on a road in the state of Veracruz. A dozen people had to be hospitalized for bruises and lack of oxygen. Others got out of the vehicle with backpacks.
So far, we recorded 98 people, and we will continue to be present here. We have found 1 minor so far. We have not reported as such. We did not say how many children, how many adults, because we continue our activities. It will be done in the end.
The Bank of England numbers came as Bank of England debates whether to hike interest rates next week by a greater amount than it has in a generation in order to bring inflation under control, adding to indications that the greater inflation in 40 years is damaging the economy. Data released on Friday indicates that annual consumer credit growth increased to 6.5% in June from 5.8% in May. This is the highest level since May 2019. That's all we have for now. And now let's have a reminder from our main stories. China's President Xi Jinping on Thursday warned his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden not to play with fire over Taiwan during a candid telephone conversation. Russian forces launched a missile attack on the Kiev area for the first time in weeks Thursday and powdered the northern Chernihiv region as well, in what Ukraine said it was revenge for standing up to the Kremlin. Algeria, Niger and Nigeria signed a memorandum of understanding on Thursday to build up a 4,000-kilometer trans-Saharan gas pipeline. In the UK, inflation hit a 4-decade high, placing greater pressure on the Bank of England to respond with a large rate hike of its own next month. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.